Hi, I'm Steve Cochran. Welcome again to Live from My Office. Today on Live from My Office, something that's very different, and it is, you got to hear it, really, to understand it. We all suffer trauma in life, but what we really need to do is figure out how we react to that trauma. It's not what knocks you down, it's what gets you up again. But when you hear the story of what Patti Vasquez has been through, you may wonder how she was able to get up again. And her family's been able to get up again. It's pretty remarkable. So stick around and listen for that. A very personal story from Patti Vasquez in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, I want to say thank you to Andrew Shaw from the Chicago Blackhawks. He announced his retirement at the ripe old age of 28. Smart guy. Too many concussions. The doctor said you really need to quit. And as hard as that is for him and guys like Brian Bickle and guys whose careers ended far too early because of illness or health conditions, we just have to say thank you. Thank you for some great memories. And I don't know if he could ever have a camp where he teaches maybe youngsters how to do that headbutt slap shot of his, but it'd be entertaining. So thank you, Shawzy, and good luck with whatever you choose to do with a very long run of the rest of your life. Stay healthy. All right. As always, we are sponsored by, speaking of the Blackhawks, a great Blackhawk fan himself, David Hochberg and Team Hochberg at 855-56-DAVID or 56david.com. And you can check the show notes out wherever you're listening now. Subscribe, rate, and review right there as well. And there'll be information on a great charity that Patti brought up to me that I will highlight in the final segment of the show. But let's take that break now. Let's come back. And let's hear this conversation I had with Patti Vasquez. As I said, very personal, very private stuff, but a story that she decided to tell. And we're back with that next on Live from My Office. If you're purchasing a new home or refinancing the one that you are in, you need to do what we do. We call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. David would like to thank you for allowing Team Hochberg to help you, your friends, your family, your coworkers with a mortgage in the past year. They had a phenomenal year, and the business is still crazy. Team Hochberg funded over $355 million in refinance transactions. Help listeners secure lower rates, shorten the term of their loans, pay off debt. Save listeners over $275,000 a month. And Team Hochberg also helped listeners purchase over $88 million worth of new homes, second homes, and investment properties. When the pandemic hit, Team Hochberg helped listeners understand the importance of and explained how to take advantage of forbearance to save their homes. Team Hochberg helped them make a crazy year not so crazy. And they helped me and my family, and, well, they've helped thousands of folks like you, my podcast listeners. But if you didn't get to them last year, get to them this year, get to them now. Call 855-56-DAVID or go to 56david.com and tune into Home Sweet Home Chicago, hosted by David Hochberg, for all sorts of house money questions. Just about everything you could think of. And you're welcome to play. It's Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. on WGN. Homeside Financial, an equal housing lender, NMLS number 1124061. All right, back on Live from My Office, and one of the great things about having this podcast is I don't have to have meetings afterwards about people that I talk to and what we talk about and things like that. So I can say, here is my friend, Patti Vasquez. Hi, Patti.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me. Good to hear your voice.
Well, good to hear yours, and hopefully we'll see each other in person again someday. So, we have to talk about something that is not publicly known by very many people for good reason. Your family went through the absolute worst thing any family can go through, and that's to have a child that was murdered. And in this case, it's maybe, I don't know how I can quantify this, but maybe even more dramatic because of the person who was involved, and that's John Wayne Gacy. So I'll give people a chance to get their chin off the floor and then give you the background on what happened to your brother.
Right. It's still weird to say out loud so that other people can hear it. And I can remember almost every single person, the situation in which I pulled them aside or decided that I needed to tell them, because, I know my brother, Michael Bonin, Mike, more from his absence, more from his disappearance, more about how he was murdered than I really remember about Mike. Michael Bonin was my dad's youngest son. Both my parents had previous marriages,
Right.
had three children from each marriage. And, you have to imagine it's funny because somebody asked me this. They're like, what do you remember about Mike? Well, he was 12 years older than me, which means that when he disappeared, he was 16.
Right.
I was 4. And no 16-year-old was hanging out with their little half-sister.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've talked to a lot of his friends. And from what I learned about Mike, who was funny and great at baseball and tough and dearly missed, he probably would not have hung out with a 40-year-old. But he disappeared when I was 4. The clearest memory I have of when my brother was missing was my dad going to all the police stations. He actually would come in with a picture of Mike, and it's the picture that everybody sees in the newspapers of all the young men, all the boys, the black and white photos. It's the one that when he passed away, he still had that photo in his wallet. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized there was something brilliant that my father did, which was tell the police officers, hey, I found this little girl. She's lost. And I was confused. I remember sitting in these big wooden chairs. My legs were dangling off the edge. And I realize now, all these parents who were desperate to find their sons were often told he's a runaway or he'll show up, boys will be boys kind of a thing. And I realized that it was quite brilliant because my dad was breaking the ice with them, getting sympathy from them with me, which I think was really smart because he was desperate to find his son, and they
Sure.
wouldn't necessarily, have a response. But what I learned was, when we finally got the phone call, we got the phone call at Christmas time in 1978. I think it was like just after Christmas, right around New Year's. My mom was the one that got the phone call. I remember she was standing over the sink and she was cradling the phone between her shoulder and her ear. And I just heard her just kind of sharply answer the questions on the phone and then went over and woke up my dad. Larry, it's about Mike. And that was when we learned that the police had found Michael's fishing license in John Wayne Gacy's closet. And from there, they never told me anything. They never told me what happened. I mean, how do you explain this horrifying tragedy to a 7-year-old?
Of course you don't. Yeah, right.
No, even the police officers who I've become friends with, several of them, detectives who they couldn't. It was they still seem to have a tough time understanding just the severe, the scope of this. If you remember all those photos of all the news crews and everyone there, and for me, no one talked to me. My parents didn't even bring me to the memorial service, which was at St. Luke's Lutheran Church. I just know that I've tried to get pieces of the story because part of that is also a piece of my life that was blocked off for me, which of course it makes sense. But I was also learning from them that we don't talk about this. The phone would ring all day long, newspapers and people, obviously condolences too. But it was, my dad never talked about it. When I finally came out with the story in 2019, one of my dad's friends called a radio show. I went on Jonas Esposito's show to talk about it, and he knew my dad. My dad was a limo driver, and he talked about how my dad was the funniest guy he had ever met. And he said, I found out later about your brother Mike being murdered by John Wayne Gacy, and so my dad people just didn't know, and so that's how I led my life too. But making the choice to be a performer, I knew was really complicated. And, you start out in comedy and you have these dreams of being famous and then you see all the people, you see all the comics that their lives kind of become exposed. And I thought, well, if I do this, I need to be very protective of my family's privacy. And I don't want to be the comic that everyone wants to know about, because when people would find out, they had questions, and it became a curiosity. It would have been the start of every conversation at every comedy club or every radio show I ever did. Can you imagine, Steve?
Well, of course not, right?
Yeah.
No, well, especially in the era that you're talking about, because that would have been, question number one. Everybody tried to be Howard in Howard's bad old days. Howard Stern we're talking about. And that would have been topic A. And, your feelings, not so important. You're here. You signed up for this, so we're just going to, rake you over the coals. So I think you made the right choice. But for people who know you from the stage, is that the primary choice or the reason for the choice of using Vasquez as your stage name?
It absolutely was. I used my mother's maiden name, and the thing was that I always put in my journals all through high school. I pulled one out recently because with no place to go, I've had plenty of time to sit with my thoughts.
Sure.
And I pulled out my diaries from high school, and on the inside cover, I always wrote Patricia Dora Gabriela Vasquez Bonin, which is my middle name, my confirmation name, my mother's maiden name, and my dad's last name, my legal name. Mm-hmm. And it was intuitive to just automatically decide. And Bonin is such a unique name. It's not very common. And the summer that I started doing stand-up comedy was the same summer that Gacy was being executed. And man, if you wanted to see if somebody really wants to do stand-up comedy, try standing in the back of the room while dozens of comics are making jokes about your brother's killer.
The thing that people don't understand is because what's topical at that point is this horrible nightmare of this guy in clown makeup and as a clown who's killed all these young men.
Yeah.
And that's your family. And you got to listen to a bunch of jackass comics riffing on it. I can't imagine.
It was surreal because it was only, about 15, 16 years after Michael was discovered. And I remember when he was identified, they used Mike's dental records. And my mom was in the kitchen and she was saying that it would have been better never to know what happened to him, which, of course, if we had never known, that would also be a living hell.
Right.
Having this be so public and the way it's consumed, the stories are consumed. Like I didn't know anything for a long time until I decided I had to come forward. But I was, there were things here and there that I knew about. Obviously, there are things that are going to get through. And people, when they would find out, would talk to me differently in that moment. And so I didn't tell that many people. I didn't want it to be the first thing they thought of. And in general, I would just leave the room if a comic had a joke about Gacy. I never told a comic not to do material. That's, if that's what they want to do. It was disappointing. It was disheartening. It was hard, but I would just leave the room or not say anything. And I've had a lot of friends who I had to call who I've known for 25 years that I never told them. And I could hear them trying to figure out, did I ever make a joke? And it's like, I don't hold that against anybody. I don't think that people understand the personal gravity of it. And there's plenty of conversations you and I have had them, whether something is too soon, what's off limits. I don't believe in censoring anybody, but I also need to preserve my own mental health in situations like that.
But I think what you're describing is important for people to understand. There's a lot of unwritten rules in show business, and one of them in stand-up comedy is you don't tell people what material to do, and you don't tell them what not to do. But by the same token, you walking away from folks when they're in the middle of those conversations was because I certainly wasn't smart enough to pick up on it. Not that I was doing John Wayne Gacy jokes with you, but you and I have been great friends forever. And I never picked up on it until you told me the story. So are you that good an actress, or at some point did any of your friends, male or female, finally say, hey, what's up with you and what's going on? And did anybody have a clue?
Well, no, because there were a couple times, and Will Durst, for example, came into town, and he was one of my favorite. He's one of my favorite comics.
Guy,
yeah, and he's one of my friends. At the time, I was his MC and didn't know him, but I was so thrilled to be working with Will Durst, and he had a John Wayne Gacy joke, and it wasn't a good joke either. It was just a terrible joke. And I didn't want to say anything, but my friend Patricia Nelson, who was a bartender at the time there, asked me what was going on because she could see it. And Hannah Stanley said the same thing. A few years ago, Hannah Stanley and I were at a show, and this sketch group did a whole stretch of Gacy jokes, and I had to leave the room and go to the bathroom, and she followed me, and she said I looked like I was completely I had lost all the color in my skin, and my eyes were, because when you're in a comedy club, whether it was Will Durst or the sketch group, you're so you're vulnerable because you've lowered your guard. That's the whole idea of comedy, is to let the unexpected happen. And then when that happens, I can't, it's very hard. I'm very vulnerable. So Patricia Nelson just told Will Durst, she didn't say who, she said, hey, you're in Chicago. And this was in the 90s. She said, just so you know, there are people, who are deeply affected by this, and maybe you want to think about that. And Will took it out of his act without him ever knowing it was me. Hannah, it was really hard. And I remember every moment. I think you and I were at a car show when I told you, because you immediately told me about Karen Conti and Greg Adamski, who I had become friends with. And that was surreal. I did not know that they had worked on his capital punishment case. It took me months to tell them. And I only told Greg. And Greg was so wonderful. I mean, you could see in his face that he was like, oh my, and he said, I'm sorry. And I said, no, my mom and I have talked about this. We know that you have a job. I adore you as a human being. And what I got from Greg and I had incredible conversations. And I think it helped him a little bit with the job he had to take on. And for me, it gave me a piece that I knew nobody else had. Nobody in the world had that kind of connection that I did with Greg.
Well, and because of the connections and because of who you were publicly as your career grows, the story isn't going away. It comes up in various places. And I remember, vividly a couple of years ago, you and I having a conversation and you talking about going public with this because people, were asking in different forms about different things that could lead to it. So what was the ultimate decision point? Why talk about it? And by the way, it's the healthy thing to do. But when you come from backgrounds like you and I came from, and this is not a knock on your parents or my parents, it just was different. Talking about the most personal stuff, it's just not what you do. So why go forward and talk about it?
Well, and the thing is about becoming a stand-up comic and standing on a stage, it's a very powerful position. Yep. And I think that was what helped me for so many years was you don't need to know how sad my life has been in the past or, the tragedies that we've suffered and endured and survived. I can make you laugh because I know how bad life can be. There's that quote from Robin Williams about why comedians do what we do. And, I was very comfortable with the material that I do, the way I did it. I didn't feel I needed to talk about things like what they call edgy, which is just really mean comedy. Yeah. But I had planned to write a story about my family. I thought that there were so many stories about this murderer that there wasn't enough humanity on our side of things, that we've become, victim number 6.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, and like the way they describe Michael's disappearance isn't even accurate, that he was on his way to see his uncle, those kinds of things. I thought, what was Michael's story? So I started writing a book about him. I started interviewing people, and I thought someday I would do that. I talked to publishers. And it was still hard because I also, my sisters grew up with Mike. Their loss is different than my loss. And I wanted to protect them too. And for a long time, my dad, he was very comfortable and very happy that I had chosen to protect everyone's privacy. Sure. When I decided to run for office, I sat in the attorney's office. So when you start your committee, and I was running to be the state rep for the 19th district, I had worked really hard in Springfield for years as an advocate. Yep. I knew I could do a good job. And so I was willing to take that chance. I just thought that I would have the choice of when to share my story. I still thought I had time. And so we started the committee, and my lawyer looked at all the information. He goes, well, your name has to appear as Patricia Dora Bonin on the ballot because it's on your driver's license. That's your legal name. But we can also put Patti Vasquez in quotation marks because that's been your professional name. That's your public name. That's all legal. So now we have a very long name on the ballot. And right away, because, incumbents, and this was an appointed incumbent, even though she had never really done anything for the community as far as in her role as a representative, has a lot of money, has a lot of power, and they started a whisper campaign. And the way I found out, a whisper campaign meaning they were questioning, well, why is she using Bonin? Why is she using Vasquez? And they started picking that apart, which, is fair game in that sense that like everything is up for, is up for debate or conversation or to be consumed by the public if you're running for office. But what I was surprised by was, one, how quickly it was and how vicious it was, how racist it was, because they started spreading rumors that I was using my husband's name, that Bonin was my husband's name, and that I was using it to sound more white. And that was, and you're right.
Oh,
and I found
classy.
Yeah, and I found that out from a friend of mine. The campaign, Lindsay LaPointe's campaign, didn't realize that he was my friend. He had received a message from someone working with her. He's like, she has a lot of really smart people working for her. They're starting to work on this thing about how you're using your husband's name. And I said, well, that's not my husband's name. And that was early in the campaign, so I tried not to let it distract me. But I started to get a lot of anxiety about these endorsement sessions when you stand in front of a group, whether it's a union or special interest groups, and you want their endorsement or their money or their support. And I thought, when is that question going to come up? When are they going to accuse me of that? But I still try to put it away. And that was early in September. A few weeks later, I was at another meeting, and my friend Jaime Morales came up to me, and he goes, "Hey, that's a shame what they're doing about your name." And I was like, "What?" And on some of the boards, like the message boards, the neighborhood groups, they were saying I was using Vasquez to appeal to progressive voters. That I was trying to sound more Mexican. I was like, "Well, this is now. I don't know if I can. I have to do my work. I have to be focused on running for office. I have to be focused on connecting with voters, and all these different elements to that goal." And I said, well, we need to address this. And so I sat down and I chose Bob Chirito from the Chicago Magazine because he was the one reporter after I was fired from WGN that didn't push me on why was I fired. I wasn't ready to talk about that. And so I asked him if this was something he thought was interesting. And they actually wanted an exclusive. They didn't want me to talk to anybody else. And I wasn't prepared to do that either. And you helped me through that too. When I decided I was going to come forward,
right.
You said you've got to call some of your friends in the media and make sure that they don't feel blindsided by this. And so I called Annabelle Laval and asked for her advice because I needed people that I could trust. And it wasn't obviously her type of story, but she, encouraged me to call Lourdes Duarte. And I called Jonas Bizito because, she also had me on her show to talk about my campaign. I needed people that I felt comfortable with. And in retrospect, I wish I hadn't done TV. I thought Lourdes was lovely, but it's the B-roll. And my campaign told me, they were like, television is out of our control. We don't know what they'll show. And my sisters didn't need to go through that again, seeing the footage from when the bodies were discovered. And I wish that I had just kept it a little more simple.
But again, it is out of your control, as is right. So much at that point. And I almost feel like, and I don't know that we've ever talked about this, but I almost feel like this was a pressure valve that had to be released in some way at some point. And, you did what you had to do to move forward, to manage the situation before it became unmanageable. And it takes me back to when you're a little girl and you don't know what's going on. You just know it's bad because you see the hurt and the pain with your family. All that stuff doesn't go away. That dynamic, it just exists. It's in the ether. So when you press forward to do this, you must be running into some walls to try to get a book done, right?
Yes. I have about 20 chapters, 3 of which are finished. I started writing, you get an idea and I said, well, this has to be its own chapter or this has to be. So what I'm focusing on is trying to tell my dad's story. He was so charismatic and funny. And I think like me used that to deflect any sort of, we don't want sympathy, like the look on people's faces when I tell them. And again, it's just so hard because you relive it. You relive those at the moment when you found out, right? And that 20 years, 30 years of being quiet about it, not wanting people to think of it. When this documentary recently came out, the number of people, I was surprised at how many people started calling me and messaging me. And that was what I didn't want, was for people to see that those images or hear that story and the first thing they think of. And in a way it is beautiful and it is lovely. Now it is humanized for them. And so that part, I'm grateful that people take it that way. I'm just glad I didn't do it for the last 30 years of my life.
Right. And you want to tell your story because it is your story, the story of you and your greater family, and obviously of Mike. But the documentary folks are, taking all this, boiling it down into one streamable piece. Is that why you didn't get involved with it?
That's the part that's interesting. In fact, they as soon as the piece came out in Chicago Magazine, a good friend of mine messaged me and he goes, "Look, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. And I have a friend who's working on this documentary." And I was contacted by a lot of people. There were people from Canada. There were people from Los Angeles. They were all over the country. The only person that I talked to were these producers, these filmmakers that did this last documentary that's on Peacock. And I connected with them. And Tracy Ullman is her name, and Allison True I spent hours on the phone with them, telling them that, look, this isn't my story to tell. And I connected them with a lot of Mike's friends because they reached out to me. And that was the most beautiful thing, was how many of Mike's friends were so grateful to know that someone might be telling Mike's stories. They get together. Mike's friends still play poker and they hang out. And one of them was a fan of mine from when I used to tour with the Bob and Tom a comedy tour, and he listened to me for decades. He was crying on the phone and telling me these great stories. So I connected everybody with the filmmakers, and Mom and I talked, and I thought, well, this is an opportunity. It was an interesting way in that I thought that the way they presented it to me, but ultimately we were not involved in the project. And I got to sit down and talk about it in a way I hadn't. They were very kind, but I think that they had an idea of what they wanted the documentary to be. And almost in the back of my mind, my bigger reason for sitting down was Mike's friends. They said every time, so they watch all that stuff, wondering why no one has ever talked about Mike. And, I want to be able to tell that story and also humanize what that moment of getting the phone call, of finding out. And I think some of those stories have been told, but it does seem like the documentaries tend to go toward the salacious, the horrendous. They don't, personalizing it, I think, makes people uncomfortable.
No, there's no question. Without a doubt. And also to be able to speak for victims' families who have never spoken in the big picture. I know that matters too.
Right, and I don't speak for all families, and that's not
but
fair.
I mean, in general, be somebody who can represent that position.
Right, and what that torture, that lifelong torture is like. Because look, the podcast, My Favorite Murder, the Karen Kilgraff cast me in a pilot for a show, or helped cast me in a show that I was in for ABC Studios, and then she went on to do My Favorite Murder. And I know that she's a nice, sweet, funny, brilliant woman. But it's weird to me that like the elevation of pieces like that, laughing about it, being titillated by it, giggling over bodies in a crawl space, like that's really hard to come to terms with. And, people make jokes about how much women love watching about serial killers. It's a very weird thing to be a part of that pop culture and not have any recognition of I'm sure that there are, I just don't listen to anything out there. I don't follow any of it, but the lifelong hurt isn't addressed in a way that is, and then there's no way to do that. That's why I would like to be able to write a book about it.
And you're working on it, and that'll become what it becomes. And we're late here, and I want to be respectful of your time. But there's another piece to this story, which is dramatic and unsettling, and all of those, and we can't really address it in full to do it, to be appropriate about it. However, in the interest of at least mentioning it, we need to talk about the fact that you were a victim of violence as well. That's another layer of trauma for your entire family. But how did you not just shut down after what you knew about your brother and your growing knowledge of that as a young performer or as a kid in school? I don't know how you got through that.
I think that, thank you. I think that, so I was abducted when I was 3 years old and sexually assaulted and tied in a laundry bag and left in a basement. And when you ask me how did I make it, I honestly don't know how my parents did. I think for my mom, she puts it someplace and it's not to be discussed. And my dad, drank a lot. I don't know what that must have been like. For me, because you're 3 and you're in the laundry bag trying to get out. And I went home and my mom knew that something was wrong because my clothes were inside out. I had soiled myself. And I only found out recently that my mom, the police told her that they had this guy and that she could press charges. It was a neighbor. He was young. When he was brought in, he told the police that I came over and took my clothes off for him. And the police,
God, it's
3. A 3-year-old. Yeah. But my mom chose not to pursue it. And I can't be mad at her. I'm as somebody who seeks justice. I don't know how it would have been for me. She didn't want me to have to go through that every day. But I also think that she didn't want to, and self-preservation is important and valid. But for me, I think that, when I think when I feel fresh air on my face, I remember coming out of that basement, and I think that's what I have. It's like that I can breathe, that being out of that basement is joyous.
Well, but that's so incredible because of the emotion in your voice right now. I know how raw and how real this is. And I also salute you for speaking about it now, because I think anytime a woman who's a public person who's gone through this level of violence can talk about it, I think you empower other women to talk about it as well. And silence is crushing.
Well, and that was what was so maddening, so infuriating about Lindsay LaPointe's campaign, was that she called me a disgusting extremist, said I could not protect women in the instance of rape and incest. And I've talked to a woman who told me that she was brutally raped when she was 17 years old. And she said she thought about, wanting to run for office. And when she saw those mailers, she said, I now know that I can never do that. I couldn't take being on those mailers. And it was hard. I mean, I was on porches crying because I could see the mailer sticking out of the mailbox. And I would write on my little, we have what they call lit, for dropping off at doors. And I would write on there, my name is Patti Vasquez. I'm a survivor of sexual violence and rape. And if you have any questions, here's my number. And it was, it's insane to me that would be fair game for people to weaponize trauma, to put survivors, and not just me, but the police officer and veteran that was on the mailers with me. He was a survivor of domestic violence. His dad threw him through a glass window when Joe Duplessis stepped up to his dad to prevent him from beating his mom anymore. And, people are like, oh, it's politics, you should expect that.
No,
it's because we accept it, and I don't accept that.
I don't accept it either. You're 100% right. All right. It's a book to come. It's conversations to continue, and we obviously need to go a little deeper on this. I'm glad you're talking about it, but mostly I'm glad you're talking about it for you, because I never had a chance to meet your dad. He sounds like nothing but fun and a very fascinating man. And I know your mom. I've never been sure how your mom felt about me, but I know for a fact
she loves you. Believe me, I'm almost 50. I don't know how she feels about me.
You need to do what we do. When we need Team Hochberg's help, we do this crazy thing. We call him. He's your trusted local lender. And David would like to thank you for allowing Team Hochberg to help you, your friends, your family, your coworkers with a mortgage in the past year. Team Hochberg funded over $355 million in refinance transactions, helped listeners secure lower rates, shorten the term of their loans, pay off debt, and save listeners over $275,000 a month. My daughter and one of my sisters used Team Hochberg in the last year. By the way, it's the second time they've done it. Maybe the third. Team Hochberg. Oh, and you know what? I've used Team Hochberg multiple times. But you knew that. Team Hochberg also helped listeners purchase over $88 million worth of new homes, second homes, and investment properties. When the pandemic hit, Team Hochberg helped listeners understand the importance of and explain how to take advantage of forbearance. That's that term that came up so big in 2020. And using that forbearance to save their homes. Point being, if you have a question about anything related to the fog that comes over you when money's being discussed, you're not alone. We're all like that. Get a hold of Team Hochberg. They help me. They help thousands of my podcast listeners, and they're going to greatly appreciate the opportunity to help you secure a mortgage this year. But they can't help you if you don't call. You know what I'm saying? I can't call for you. David can't call you at home. He doesn't know where you live yet. 855-56-DAVID or 56david.com. And tune in to Home Sweet Home Chicago, hosted by David Hochberg, Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. on WGN. Homeside Financial, an equal housing lender, NMLS number 1124061. As you know, if you're a regular listener, on every episode of Live from My Office, I highlight a charity worth mentioning, and I hope you have one you'd like me to mention. Here's what you need to do. Simply drop me an email to thecochranshow@gmail.com with any details you might have on that charity. At the bare minimum, give me a website and why they appeal to you. And then I will highlight them, give them some free pub, as we're doing today for KidsAboveAll.org. KidsAboveAll.org is a charity that is right in the name. Kids Above All means celebrating kids, helping kids, giving kids an opportunity to maximize their lives. And Kids Above All started as an orphanage over 100 years ago, and just in the past year changed their name to something that they felt was more encompassing for all that they do right now, strengthening families and dealing with trauma, stepping up for kids on every level. You could be a mentor. You could learn about fostering. You can contribute your time and certainly your money if you are in a position to do that. But join the team. It's kidsabovall.org. Any way you can help. It's a great website. Lots of information there. Check it out. And thanks, Patti, for the heads up on that as we continue on Live from My Office. And I tell you that later this week, we're recording this episode on Monday, April 26th, scheduled to appear on upcoming episodes of Live from My Office, Mark Giangreco and Eddie Olczyk, a couple of hockey geniuses. And Eddie, of course, will talk to us, Mark will as well, I'm sure, about the Kentucky Derby, which is coming up in just a matter of days as well. I appreciate your support. I thank you for listening. I hope you'll tell some friends to do the same. Wherever you get podcasts, you can download, subscribe, rate, and review to Live from My Office. Thank you, Ross Cochran, for producing this effort and making sure folks get to hear it. And thank you, folks, for listening. See you next time on Live from My Office.
Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event, and occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Head to cochranshow.com for more.